This 10-minute daily drawing exercise that you're watching in real time now is in the small German village of Detmold. Now, I thought this was an interesting subject, both for the tower. The actual roof part of the tower is quite complex, so there's a bit of challenge there in a brisk drawing. But I also wanted to include as many of the figures as I could and make this a bit more of a streetscape rather than just a tower. So I'm starting with this upper section of the tower because it's not covered by the foliage of the tree, so I work at getting the proportion right. I make this window slightly too large, and I've made the actual box that it sits in, I think, slightly too high. After I turned the camera off, I readjusted the line beneath it a little bit by making it thicker in an upwards direction, which I think really did bring the proportions close enough to looking more the way they do in our reference. I wish I'd done it on camera so you could see the effect that it had. But if you look at the thumbnail for this video, you'll see its final version. So now I draw the clock centered above the window because that's going to be very helpful, I decide, for positioning this more complex section of the roof. The challenge here is to, I think, draw each of these sections and stack them on top of each other, but get a nice tight vertical center line for all of them, and to get the proportions correct so that the tower doesn't end up going too high. It's really easy when we stack the forms piece by piece to just go slightly too large on each of them, particularly when there's some detail to do in a relatively small drawing, and then the whole piece ends up being noticeably too high. So that will be the challenge. But at this point, I'm trying to do these rather fiddly little gabled windows that sit on each of the corners. For a relatively simple church, it is a fairly complex spire. I'm just looking to see where the lines align with what's under them in the reference, the lines I'm about to draw, so I can position everything nicely or accurately for that. And there we have it. I still need to keep this within the lines of the tower on the right hand side. On the left hand side, I need to establish this wall that angles away at a very steep angle. Fortunately, most of it's hidden by this tree, which does make it a much easier object to draw. And now we start to take the tower higher. Possibly I'm just a little bit too much in the middle with this next stacked part instead of being slightly angled to the left. In fact, I would say that that's definitely the case now that I'm watching it take form. I just straighten that line a little bit. Now, my tower isn't leaning as much in life as it appears to here. I just stopped recording and went and got it to make sure it's not leaning. No, it's not leaning the way it looks like it is here. I just didn't have things very aligned on the paper, and perhaps the camera is slightly twisted again. However, I pushed on with this final section of the tower. Notice how I drew this uppermost section that has a concave and a convex element to it. I did one of them first and then the other sitting on top. I find that for me that's a more accurate way to get the symmetry correct. Now I'm drawing my tower larger, so that makes it harder to judge if the proportions are correct. I suspect it's a little bit too high. But now I come down, I reserve some space for that tree, and I start to come down the tower. So I'm breathing a sigh of relief because I feel like I've done the most fiddly part and it looks reasonable enough. But now I have the challenge that I've used a lot of my 10 minutes, and there's actually quite a lot of detail now to do, because we have all the fun of ground level not that far away, where there is a lot of detail. They are figures, and the closest group of figures are close enough that I need to try and capture a certain amount of accuracy in how they look. Now, the way I usually approach figures is I don't have to make them look exactly the same as in the reference. I don't have to get the gender or the size or the proportions of any of these figures or their clothing the same. I settle for having them look human, so that might work for you as well. This certainly isn't a portrait of these people, even though I, in fact, do know them. And so I start with the closest figure, because I'm going to then use that figure to judge the scale of the other figures. Now, it's flat ground and I'm on the same ground as they are. So eye level is basically through everyone's head. They're all a bit taller than me, so just a bit below their head. And so the difference in size, in scale for ones further away, will be demonstrated by their feet being higher than the feet of the closest person. And that's what I've done. And that also goes for a small group that I draw to the left of this group, much further away. Again, their head is approximately the same height, but their feet are much higher. And with the clothing, it's good to make, even in a 10-minute drawing, to make a quick effort to add some value to give a sense of darker and lighter items of clothing. I even put the stripes on the singlet of one of these and on one of these figures, which is not the sort of detail I normally do. If I feel like a figure's looking a bit thin or the proportions of the torso aren't right and the figure's turned on side on or 3/4 view, I find sticking a backpack on is a great way to re-establish more accurate looking silhouettes. If a head's too small, I either increase the hair or I stick a cap on. So there are lots of options, particularly in winter scenes, to modify our first take of these small, quite gestural figures, but an important part of a streetscape and an important skill to work on if we want to draw streetscapes. Enjoying architecture really isn't enough if we want to capture a street. It just won't look real if we can't put figures somewhere, somehow, in our streets. Now, I'm getting very close to my 10 minutes and I'm starting to feel the pressure. And in a moment, I will be switching to double time for the last, I think it was 90 seconds or 2 minutes, where I basically did the tree and some of the umbrellas that we have at ground level in the lower right. So we're still in our 10 minutes at this stage. And if you're finding this helpful, please hit the like button. If you're doing these daily 10-minute drawing exercise or trying to do them daily, I would love to hear that in the comments. I'll need to keep going with them if enough people are doing them frequently enough. This is number 21, so I suppose that means I've done 3 weeks of them so far. So, working on the figures and just trying to keep it all looking real. It does mean we don't have to worry about the ground level details of the church, which is nice too. Doing these umbrellas. I didn't quite finish the lower right detail, but did the best I could for the time I had. In these skills developing exercises, we're not trying to end up with a finished drawing. If we do, that's great. But what we're really wanting is to have a 10-minute session where we focus on particular skills and getting them correct. And now we jump to double time and work on some more of these figures. And I think we've just switched back to normal time. I'm not sure what happened there in my editing, but never mind. I'm doing the tree now, which is pretty quick anyway. Now, I think the way I've done this tree, while it's pretty sparse in some ways for line, is a really good technique to develop for location sketching when we really don't have time to create a more polished effect. That creating something that still reads as a tree can still help with showing light direction and simply provides a really wonderful contrast to the line work of the architecture is a great skill to develop. Principles I used for that very quick gestural tree are exactly the same principles I used for my most detailed studies. I just use them faster, simpler, and with larger lines a little bit more further apart than I would have liked. And now working on these figures and some of the ground level details, and then we're just about done. I've used a 0.1mm pen for this. I had planned to use a 0.2, but I decided that the spire would just be too gluggy with ink, too thick with ink, because of the amount of detail I was having to draw. So this final window on the church, just so the tower does look as though it's attached to a church building, this little air vent that's above the window, and then I just do a little bit of hatching for the rows of tiles, really to create the value of the colour. And that's it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, I hope you found this interesting. It's a great little subject to draw. Of course, you'll find the photo on my channel community page, so why not go there and find it, screenshot, print off a copy if you want, or you can just use it from this video if that works for you. But whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. See you next time. Bye.